Well, no easy way to get around this one as the Las Vegas Raiders fall to the Cincinnati Bengals 41-24, dropping to 2-7. A 4-game losing streak now becomes a 5-game losing streak. It is a bummer day here in the desert, but I am happy, Eddie Paskal, I'm happy, because my friend from Yahoo Sports, Jason Fitz, is here. Fitz, first off, I apologize to you. We thought we were going to get you a win this week. We talked about it a few weeks ago. We thought this was going to be the week. Alas, it was not. Um, Let us begin here. Zoom out, right? Raiders are in the midst of a 5-game losing streak, like we've discussed. What does this team need to accomplish in the bye over the course of the next 14 days before they head to Miami to take on the Dolphins? What needs to be done? What can be done to, I don't even want to say salvage anything, but to move in the right direction a little bit?
Complete reset, an understanding that today forward doesn't have to be defined by anything that's happened so far, and a real charged moment by the locker room. Go back to a few years ago when the season looked like it was over under Rich Bisaccia at the time, and the Raiders found a way to win a bunch of games and put themselves into the playoff conversation. I talked to Max Crosby after that season. One thing Max stressed is that it was the players that sat down, looked each other in the face, and said, "Hey, from here forward, we got to decide what we're fighting for. Like we can lay down or we can work our tails off." And we all know how that went. Now, obviously, I'm not sitting here and I'm not stupid enough to sit here and say that this team's going to suddenly go on a massive run that gets them into the playoffs. But man, you have to find at some point the reason you play the game, and the reason players at that level play the game is in part for the business, in part for the love, in part for it's what they've done their whole lives. All of those things have to come together, and you got to play for pride. Like there's just a moment here because there is a importance to the culture moving forward that comes from a season like this. Like if a season like this becomes something more than this moment, man, everything gets lost. So if you're Antonio Pierce, if you're Max Crosby across the board, you've got to figure out how to get players to buy into the back half of a season that right now looks like it's going to get very, very long. And the minute people start quitting, everybody starts quitting. That is a disease in the locker room. So you're going to have to find a way to get people to stay engaged. You're going to have to find a way to get everybody to really buy in. And you're going to have to find a way for the pieces that are going to be here moving forward to really not only help their development, but help start to bridge sort of to whatever chapter looks like it's next for them in this organization.
And we've talked about this a lot. I mean, obviously over the past couple of weeks, Fitz, but this is the moment, right? Or this is the series of moments where if you're a Raiders fan, you just thank your lucky stars that number 98's in that locker room, right? A tone setter, a guy who is the ultimate teammate and holding folks accountable in a good way, and in times giving people a kick in the rear end when they need it. A complete effort guy. I mean, you look at Max when that game is out of reach in the late third quarter, early fourth quarter. I mean, you see 98 running around playing with his hair on fire. There's no quit in him, and I think that it really, when you have the benefit of having Max Crosby in that locker room, when he is undoubtedly the face of your franchise, one of the faces of this league, Fitz, when you have the benefit of him, granted, the results haven't been there, but if there's one thing that we know over the course of the next 8, 9 games, whatever it ends up being, right? Like there is going to be Max will not allow any quit or lack of effort from the guys in that locker room. We shift back from the big picture now to immediately what's in front of us, Fitz, and again, the Raiders have a really tough day at the office. We heard from AP postgame. He said, look, it's a bad day as the Raiders fall 41-24. I do kind of want to level set a little bit, right? Like there is no version of the story that you can tell where you say, hey, it's not that bad. The Raiders did this, that, and the other kind of well. But I think it's also important to acknowledge reality where Andre James ruled out, so JPJ starts at center. Colton Miller gets hurt. Andres Pete comes in at left tackle. Andres Pete gets hurt. Thayer Munford goes in at left tackle. Cody Whitehair gets hurt. Dylan Parmenters. Nate Hobbs gets hurt. DeCamarion Richardson comes in. I mean, like, you laugh, especially, you look, I should say, especially on the offensive line, Fitz. I mean, you never want to make light of an injury, certainly, but at some point it almost becomes comical. Like, you're on your 9th, 10th combination of offensive linemen, and at that point against the Bengals team that we talked about is better than their record indicated, specifically on offense. We'll get to Joe Burrow in a second. And you have to put a point. It's like, what are you to do if you're the silver and black along the offensive front?
Yeah, I mean, and Trey Hendrickson is one of the best pass rushers in the league for a
A
reason. He
machine.
feasted a career high in sacks, and I honestly felt bad for Thayer Mumford because he was just left out there on an island over and over and over again, and there wasn't an answer. He didn't have an answer for that. It's just this is one of the best taking on somebody that's still trying to get their footing in a game, and it's a bad situation. Depth is an issue, but I yell at this all the time. There are not 32 starting caliber left tackles in the NFL right now, which is why in the draft they're so valued. Same with right tackle. There just aren't 64 guys in the league that you turn around and say, yeah, man, we're set at our tackle position. That doesn't exist. So once you start getting into this level of depth, now you're talking about guys that you're hoping for dear life you can hang on. It changes the way you call your runs, changes the way you call your passes. The offensive line had already struggled up to this point this year. Now all of a sudden everything's even quicker. No matter which quarterback they put in, you're going to need a ton of mobility out of that person because they're going to have to run around a little bit. There's not going to be a sense of calm in the pocket. Like the entire offensive rhythm is disrupted. And we could sit here and yell about play calling all day long, and yell about the rhythm of the team all day long, but there is also just a very real element that the guys standing up and playing got to be able to make those plays. And when you're outmatched from a talent standpoint, that is also going to be a very real thing they had to deal with. By the time we get to that level of depth, I don't know what chance we thought the offensive line had.
Yeah, I mean, agreed, right? Like not the offensive line, excuse me. The telecast was talking about the offensive line, and they said that the Raiders were literally entering like your emergency in case of emergency break glass situation. There was a legitimate conversation, Fitz, today on the telecast about, okay, would the Raiders put in a defensive tackle at tackle, or would they prefer to move a tight end there? Like that was a legitimate conversation during an NFL game. That's the level to what kind of happened to the Silver and Black's offensive line this afternoon. But we talked about the quarterback play. We see Minshew gets the start. He goes 10-17, 124, getting banged up, and then Desmond Ridder comes in down 31-10. He finishes 11 of 16, 74 yards with a touchdown. I feel like we can't really get an accurate gauge of what Desmond can bring to this offense, again, behind an incredibly patchwork offensive line on the road. I did think it was a nice moment, again, big picture. Does this matter? Who knows? But to give him the chance to play in Cincinnati, I'm sure that wasn't part of the calculus, but all the same, a nice moment for him. But like your expectations, your takeaways from Desmond and, let's call it a little over a quarter and a half of football today.
Yeah, and I thought Desmond played pretty clean compared to what could be expected in that situation.
Yeah.
And look, I argued about Desmond a lot when he was the Atlanta Falcons quarterback. At the time, I was working with Harry Douglas, a former Falcon, obviously still very tied in with the organization, still lives in Atlanta, still has a lot of love for Arthur Blank. And we were arguing about whether or not the Falcons were a playoff team. I was basically the one saying, no, Desmond Ridder is not a good enough quarterback. And Harry was the one saying, yes, he is. People within the organization truly believe he can be a very good starter in this league. Now, didn't come together and obviously a full regime change, but there have been people at the NFL level that believe that Desmond Ridder can be a quality starter in the NFL. For me, at this point, when you're sitting at 2-7, why not? Why not look? Because you got to start looking at every single option. I will scream this on social media. I've screamed this to you in our text, although it hasn't been all caps because I love you too much to do that. But like this concept that the Raiders are just going to go, got to draft a quarterback. I agree. Everybody knows you got to draft a quarterback. But also I've talked to people around the league that will tell you that this year, the top quarterback selected in this year's draft would have in last year's draft ranked around 6th, like below Bo Nix. There is not, I don't believe, a Joe Burrow in this draft. There is not a CJ Stroud in this draft. Heck of a lot more likely in this draft to end up with a Will Levis or an Anthony Richardson at quarterback than you are any of the guys we're seeing absolutely take over the league. So yeah, I really like Cam Ward and some of the things that he has there. I really like some of the things about Shedeur Sanders, but none of them are Joe Burrow as a prospect at this point. So if you're the team, you might as well look at what you got in the building because there is still a chance that if you're picking 4th or 5th, even if you want a quarterback, the quarterback you want may not be there, and you may not like any of these quarterbacks. Like all of these things are real, even though we as fans don't want to hear it. Like needing a quarterback and getting a quarterback are two very different conversations. So might as well look at everybody in the building, see if Ridder has the it factor you're looking for. Maybe he can develop into somebody that can at least be your stopgap. You can figure out what you're doing at the position.
Yeah, and again, right, Fitz, and we talked about it. Unfair to kind of, AP said it in his postgame. He goes, this is a guy who's been in the building for 10 days, right? Like, that's not an exaggeration. Yeah. Like, he has literally been in Las Vegas for 10 days. So I imagine that the full playbook was not at Luke Getsy's disposal when he's calling plays for Desmond. But again, right, like to your point, let's see what you got, right? Like see what he has. And today we kind of see, he only attempts one less throw than Minshew does and a lot less work. He goes for 74 yards and the aforementioned touchdown. But again, and so much of this is because of the way the game played out, and you looked up, and this is what I really want to harp on real quick, Fitz, before we shift to the defensive side of the football. With 3 minutes left in the first half, right? 3:03 left in the first half. This was a 10-10 ball game. Stop me if you've heard that before, where the Raiders are playing
Oh
tight,
yeah.
contested football. It's not necessarily the prettiest version of football, but they are doing enough to stay in the game. And then the levees break, and we wake up, it's seemingly 15 minutes later, Fitz, and it's 31-10. To me, this game, and I don't want to say it was won or was lost in the span of this 7 minutes, but you look at the 2 minutes at the end of that first half. What happens? Tie game. Bengals go down, score a touchdown. Raiders get the ball back, punt. Then the Bengals score on their opening drive of the second half. I mean, it snowballed from there. And again, right, it's easy to say in a game that with the score was as lopsided as this that it was a cacophony of errors that led to the loss. But really, Fitz, that kind of end of the first half, start of the second half, to me is where this game really got out of hand for the Silver and Black.
Because the margins aren't there. There's no room
Mm-hmm.
for error. And this, like, as you know, and people listening probably know, I cover a lot of college football. And one thing we talk a lot about in college football is that a bad team can stay competitive for a long time, but eventually every little moment stacks up
Mm-hmm.
and you find yourself getting killed. Like, I'll use an example in this year's college football year, a team nobody listening has watched, but Michigan State played a really close first half against Ohio State, got blown out. Played a really close first half against Oregon, got blown out. Played a really close first quarter and a half against Indiana, got blown out. Why? Because, like, you can get these competitive moments, but maintaining that through and through. I was sitting at a Buffalo Wild Wings and I looked at my friend as the score was 24-10, and all of a sudden a stupid turnover turned into 31-10. And he looked at me and he said, "How did this happen? This game was just tied." And I
Yep.
said, no, this is what happens every week with this team. It's not one moment, it's one or two or three little moments that stack up, and you're like, yep, all of a sudden this thing got out of hand. And once you are in that deficit where your offensive game plan is ruined and you don't have the depth you need in several different positions to be able to really maintain the fight, now all of a sudden it's like you're taking on a heavyweight champion and you manage to stay in this thing for the first round, but you're in the third round now and everything's bleeding and everything's cut and you're just getting your butt beat. Like, it feels like this team is so close to being competitive, but one or two little moments is absolutely all that kills them.
And make no mistake about it, right? We're like, Joe Burrow is a heavyweight champion of the world, right? Like, this is a dude who went 15, started his day 15-15, ends his day 27 of 39, 251s, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 touchdowns, tying a career high. The interception, the pick six to Jack Jones there. But again, man, I mean, it just became so clear. And again, right, this is Joe Burrow who's operating without two of his three best weapons. Yes, Jamar Chase is out there doing his thing, but he's down T. Higgins. He's down other guys on that on that offensive, in the offensive periphery there. And this is a dude who still made it happen, Fitz. So again, like, we talk about the margins. We talk about the margins every single week where the Raiders don't have the ability to kind of escape when those margins aren't there for them. Well, Joe Burrow showed, like, hey, it might not be perfect for me today, but I'm going to figure out a way to get this done.
Yeah, and the frustrating part is that he's just a surgeon that can carve you up. And every time you think you got him, the difference right now at the quarterback position is look at how many times today, whether it was Max or the overall defensive line, would make the pocket shift. And Burrow was able to step up. And the minute you have to make a decision, the minute he's stepping up and stepping out, and he's forcing that next level of defense to make a decision. Am I going to guard? Am I going to cover somebody? Or am I going to step up on Burrow? He'll make you pay. Whichever one you do, he'll make sure the opposite is what kills you. Right. And that's something the Raiders don't have right now. There's just a massive difference in pocket composure and the ability to take a dead play and make something out of it. And the best teams right now, we saw some of it today. Like, I don't know how many people were watching at the same time, but the Miami Buffalo game, the number of times in that game, each of those quarterbacks looked dead in the pocket. They were able to move around, adjust, move up, and while they're on the run, they're able to make a perfect throw right over the head of somebody that turns into a big play. The number of times you can break a team if you can make their defense, when they've done everything right, still lose on that play. That's something that the Raiders don't have offensively, and that's something that the Bengals did, and that's a huge difference. The number of times it should have been Burrow sacked, and instead it was first down Cincinnati, was absolutely breathtaking.
Yeah, agreed, 100%. Fitz, again, I know we kind of joked about it at the top, but you have yet to discuss a Raiders win in 2024, and I listen. I feel for you. I feel for the fan base. I feel for everyone kind of in this building, because it has felt like you and I in particular, just based on the schedule, we've had the same conversation over
Yeah.
and over and over. And maybe the names have changed and the score has changed, but the end result has been okay, Raiders play good enough to remain competitive, can't do enough to get over the hump. So I wanted to try something a little bit different, right? I wanted to therapize a little bit. I wanted to open it up to the folks out there on Twitter, which is a dangerous world. But we did get a few really, really solid questions from the people. And I just want to kind of let's just dive in to what the people want to know. The first one from our
Love this.
friend Luke, big shout out to Luke, and a very simple, straight to the point. How can we improve the defense? And I think to me, again, we zoom out, right? And the fact that we are even asking that question headed into the bye is pretty unbelievable to me, right? We talked going into the year. That was going to be the strength of this team. That was going to be the identity of this team, is they were going to be a defense first team. And unfortunately, that has not been the case. So Jason Fitz, I ask you, very simply, how can this defense get better?
Rewind back to the beginning of the year and don't let Christian Wilkins get hurt. I'm oversimplifying here. Part of the reason, look, I was wrong about this defense. I thought it was going to be a top 5 defense. Part of the reason it hasn't been a top 5 defense is, frankly, they aren't able to get the pressure that they need to get, and health has been a big part of the reason why. So, aside from get healthy, one of the things that this defense is going to have to do is figure out how to do a better job against tight ends. Like that's got to be. We're 2 straight weeks now where we've watched guys tight ends. Gesicki is somebody that I think a lot of fantasy football experts knew Gesicki might go off today, but that speaks to the Raiders as much as anything. You've got to find a way. Especially, we forget at this point that we had Epps in the back, and that made a big difference in the safeties and the way it was all being covered. They're going to have to find a way, particularly when they're in zone. They're going to have to find a way to not let those windows get so beat up. And when they're in man, they got to find a way to better cover to better cover. Like there's a element of tight end that beats this team every week. I would be stunned if they don't spend the bye week looking specifically at the middle of that defense and what they need to do differently against tight ends.
Gesicki, speaking of tight ends, goes 5 for 100, 2 touchdowns and 2 gritties, 2 very poor gritties, by the way. I think for me, Fitz, yes, you're 100% right. Where again, like how many times have we had this conversation about the Raiders need to find a way to limit the opposing team's tight end? I think the other one for me is when are we going to see the emergence of a true, what's the word, a true number 2 to Max on that defensive line, right? And again, we talked about it. Like, obviously, Christian Wilkins gets hurt. There's nothing that me, you, or anyone in this building can do about that right now. But it's going to be Max and who, right? It was a big conversation going into the season, right? It was going to be Max plus Malcolm plus Christian. You're going to get a little more from Tyree because all eyes aren't going to be on him. Well, now we obviously know Malcolm's down. We know Christian Wilkins is down. And we haven't kind of seen – we saw obviously a nice little moment from Tyree last week, but we haven't seen consistently, Fitz, that second rusher to take some pressure off Max. So I think for me, how can it improve? Like, look, you got to get healthy, right? If Nate Hobbs is down for any period of time, like that's a concerning thing that you're not going to love. Robert Spillane, if he's not 100%, that's not something you love. But it's got to be Max and who coming out of the bye. And we have to see that not only for a quarter, Fitz, we have to see that consistently. Another question that came to us via the Twitter from at mostly charmless. I'm sure that's a reference I'm missing. Is Bowers on? And so I will say this was before the touchdown. But the question came, is Bowers still on the team? 17 yards, no bueno. He does finish, Mr. Bowers does, with 5 catches for 45 yards and 1 touchdown, 22 on the aforementioned touchdown. But I think the point is this. It's become very plain to see, very evident in a good way. Brock Bowers is a really good football player. Brock Bowers is part of the future, however you slice it, for this silver and black offense. How do we get him involved more? Again, key word here, Fitz, consistently for number 89. What is the key to making that happen, do you think?
Well, I think what we need to remember, by the way, right now, today, as we sat a few days ago, one person in the league told me that they believe Brock Bowers is already one of the 3 best tight ends in the NFL today, as it stands. So think about what that means on a team that no longer has Devontae, right? And we've seen Jacoby, I think, has done a really nice job of picking up some of that slack. But when you want to talk about what defenses do, and I've told this before, but day one of their game plan installation is they look at game wreckers. Who are the game wreckers for the other team? Brock Bowers is a game wrecker. Right now, what is happening is every single defensive coordinator is spending all of their time on the first couple of days of installation of their plan, figuring out how to bracket and slow down Brock Bowers. So to answer your question, how do you get Brock more involved? I think part of what that is somebody else on the offense is going to have to step up and become some sort of a viable threat repeatedly. Because There are plays right now, if you watch the All 22 from last week, there are plays where Brock is being triple covered and bracketed. So there's somebody in the area just in case. What do you want a quarterback to do, right?
Yeah.
So the pieces of this, one, your quarterback, if you want Brock to run downfield, quarterback's got to be able to stay upright. Two, if you want Brock to run crossing routes, somebody else has to be able to take some of the pressure off of him with what they're running to prevent to create opportunity. And then three, I do think that they need to have a set of plays that are better executable in key moments. Like, I don't understand why when we get into the red zone, number one option, number two option, and number three option should all be some way to get Brock Bowers the football. And that doesn't feel like that happens every time. So I think Getsy's got to work on some of the play calling around the red zone. But I also think somebody else is going to have to step up and burn a team enough that they then pay attention to that person for Brock to have opportunities where he's not taking on three people.
Yeah, and in terms of folks stepping up, Fitz, I mean, Jacoby Myers today goes 8 for 105, and I really, since he's come back, has added a really nice, I wouldn't say new element, but a renewed element to this offense when he's rocking and rolling. You talked about the quarterback standing up, right? If you want to give Brock this opportunity to get downfield, we carry on. The people had a lot of questions, as you would imagine, Fitz. So we move on to our friend, Mr. Washington, 387, and he goes, how's this offensive line going to look after the bye? Now, keep in mind, you and I are not medical professionals, right? We do not know what the prognosis is for the Andre Jameses, the Colton Millers, the Andres P. I mean, we can literally go down 1 to 7 on that offensive line. But what are they? Let's reframe it a little bit. What do they need to do after the bye to be a little more effective? Again, put it in big bold letters, Fitz, consistently.
Yeah, unfortunately, you got to get healthy, and I think you got to get back to your starting five.
Yeah, agreed.
We haven't really seen this starting five get time on task together very often, right? Like, so even though I think you and I would agree, it's pretty fair to say that Colton has at times struggled this year. There is not a better left tackle on this roster, and frankly, when he's healthy and playing well, he's a very good left tackle in the NFL, right? So you got to get Colton healthy, and then you've got to get the rest of your offensive line lined up for a bunch of time together. Like, there is an element of Colton standing next to JPJ is supposed to help JPJ's development, right? Like, Andre James has played well enough at center to be a consistent contributor, and Dylan Parham next to him was supposed to be the right guard, that we can look at all of that and say the only question we have is right tackle, and how can DJ Glaze hold up? Well, DJ Glaze has actually had some pretty good moments in some of these games.
I agree.
The problem is none of the rest of it has ever really gelled. So I do think the coaches could look at it and figure out, hey, do we need to change our system a little bit? Do we need to figure out how to simplify what we're doing? Maybe go a little bit more to the strengths of these five guys. But realistically, the best way that this offensive line is the best version of itself is if they get healthy, Eddie. And also, I think we got to accept the fact that this offensive line just may not be great this year.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, we talk about the harsh truths of when you're sitting at 2-7, right? Like, 2-7 is not, hey, we're a game out of this, or the balls bounce funky for us, 2 of the past 3 weeks. Like, you're sitting at 2-7, again, going into a bye. This is the opportunity to ask those tough questions, right? This is the opportunity to kind of look in the mirror and say, okay, how do we kind of, for lack of a better term, reinvent ourselves? How do we rebrand after this bye? Because whatever has happened pre-bye has candidly not been super effective, right? And again, right, with the huge caveat of the injury bug and all that, but there's also the element of reality, Fitz, right, where you don't get to 2-7 on accident, right? You and I have heard the saying over and over again from different people and in different verbiage, but essentially, you are what you earn in the NFL. That's kind of the crux of it, right? And the Raiders are now a 2-7 football team, having lost 5 games in a row, with questions going into the bye week. What are the answers to those questions? What will emerge from those questions will really define the rest of 2024 for the rest of this team. But again, I think to your earlier point about this offensive line, it would be so nice, it would be so refreshing, and I think candidly so impactful for this offense as a whole to get those starting 5 right. Even Fitz, if it's for 3 weeks, see what it looks like for 3 weeks and then be able to justify that. The Raiders don't even have the benefit of saying, hey, we've seen it for a month, we've seen it for a quarter of the season, right? NFL coaches love breaking down the season into quarters. They don't even have a quarter to look at this offensive line, this starting 5, and say, maybe this is the move that we need to make to kind of to elevate the rest of the squad. Like, it's a bummer, Fitz, but that's reality.
Yeah, and I would also add to that, Eddie, that I've said this on Raider Nation Radio before. If you want the home run of all off seasons, like the best off season you have ever seen for your favorite team, you're lucky if between the draft and free agency, you're lucky if you can nail 5 or 6 high quality new starters. Mm-hmm. That is a home. I said that to one insider the other day, And he laughed and he said, that's a Hall of Fame offseason if you
Mm.
can land 5 or 6 new starters. So if you are a Raiders fan listening to this, believing that the entire process here is just to blow the roster up, I will remind you 22 starters, 5 or 6 is a Hall of Fame level offseason. The best way for the Raiders in the future to be the best version next year that they can possibly be is to find out that whatever has been ailing this offensive line this year, injuries, scheme, whatever, is fixable. And 4 out of 5 of these guys return next year. Because the chances that you're replacing your entire offensive line, your quarterback, adding a wide receiver, maybe changing your running backs. Like we haven't even gotten to the defensive line, and you're already talking about 8 new starters you want. Like that's not going to happen. That is not real, and that doesn't work. So at some point, you got to look around as an organization and say, man, even if this season is completely lost, show me that this offensive line can become the offensive line of the future. And at least we have some, there's youth here. There's youth when you talk about Parham and JPJ. There's youth when you talk about DJ Glaze. Like, can those 3 pieces actually become building blocks? They need to become building blocks if the Raiders are going to have any chance to be competitive, not just this year, but I think for the next 2 or 3 years.
And Fitz, that's an incredible point, right? Because you and I sit there on Twitter, for better or for worse, and we see the same things. We hear everyone yelling behind their keyboards. It's time to blow it up. We need 53 new players, right? Like that's not reality, right? Like that doesn't happen in the NFL. And 2, if it were, to your point, that is not a way to build a sustained winner. And I'm glad you brought up the young guys, right? I'm glad you brought up the DJ Glaze. I'm glad you brought up JPJ. But even going to the defensive side of things, right? You look at some of the young DBs that have had a chance to play, right? DeCam Richardson gets a lot of burn today. Isaiah Polamau has been playing really well since Marcus Epps goes down. You know, we see Trayvon, not necessarily a young guy, but Trayvon Merrick, lost in all of this, Fitz, is playing some pretty incredible football and having some really nice. I'm trying to look at the stat here as I kind of ramble for a second, but doing things that we haven't seen since the great one, Charles Woodson, was doing it. Here it is. Trayvon has 10 tackles, on the day, had 10 tackles and a half a sack. It's only the 7th time in Raiders history since 1987 a defensive back has recorded 10 plus tackles and a half sack in a single game. The first time since, drumroll please, Charles Woodson in 2013, right? So again, you're seeing now, maybe the whole collective isn't working, but we see these pieces, right? We see these individual guys that are showing up and showing out. So it's a hard pill to stomach as we sit here at 2 p.m. Vegas time after another tough Raiders loss. But we're getting to the point now, Fitz, where you just have to acknowledge the guys individually that are playing well. And that's not to say that any of these guys are going out there and making it about me. But I think it's also important the guys that are in the midst of this losing streak playing good football.
Yeah, and by the way, you've got to figure out who you can build on. You got to figure out, like, if the sum of the parts isn't fine, it doesn't work. You still got to figure out if you got good parts, and then you can look in the offseason. Why are the sum of the parts not working? Like at 2-7, there is a small. Like, again, nobody wants to hear this, but okay, so let's say they blow the whole thing up today. Let's say they take away play calling duties from everybody. Let's say they go out and they just make wholesale changes to everything. What do we think is going to happen? It's going to take 9 wins to get into the playoffs this year, most likely in the AFC. So you would need a team that then goes 7-2 the rest of the way. And like, did I miss something? Do we believe that this Raiders team is suddenly capable of going 7-2 the rest of the way? Like, no, that's not realistic. So what is realistic is to figure out, okay, where are we and who can we count on moving forward? And then who can Antonio Pierce and this coaching staff really count on to be part of the culture of whatever they're trying to create? I remind everybody this all the time, but in Dan Campbell's second season, they started 1-6. And then everything started to turn around. They got momentum. By the end of the year, people were taking that Lions team seriously. Why? Because they got that momentum and the culture changed. And when you talk to players that were there at the time, they will tell you that there was a palpable difference in the room, right? So I do believe that there is some element here of, instead of looking at it and saying, throw everything out and start everything over, you got to look at it and say, how do we figure out what's wrong with players that should have enough talent to win? And how do we figure out what we need to change from a coaching standpoint to make sure that we're getting the best out of those players? It's a weird fine line to walk, but man, blowing everything up rarely works.
Yeah, and again, right, like it's something no one wants to hear at this point, though, Fitz, but it just takes one, right? I think the Raiders just need a win, right? They need a win. It's not going to happen next week with the team on the bye, but hopefully when they return to work and get ready for the Miami Dolphins, all sights set on Miami, and hopefully, a victory for the Silver and Black. Well, Fitz, again, I apologize. We'll get you a win. We'll get you a win in 2024. Some way, shape, or form,
It's
we will
always a
get
win
one.
when I hang out with you. It's
Look at
always a win
you.
when I hang out with
Look
Raider
at
Nation
you.
Radio. Let's
It is a win.
Raider Nation in general. Like I love the fact that we're all bonded together. We
Yes.
all like we live in the sea of suck together, and we're just finding our way through it.
We are. We are navigating these stormy seas, and I would rather no one sitting beside me than you, Jason Fitz. You are a busy, busy man, as we all know. So please tell me, where can the people find you? What fun stuff are you working on?
Inside coverage on Yahoo Sports is our NFL show. I should know, and it's Sunday nights. We react to every game, and then Wednesday, Fridays, and then we also fantasy football live on Sundays and Thursdays with all your fantasy needs. And then don't forget the college football power hour every Tuesday and Saturday, especially as we get into some of these draft prospects. Hit me up. I'll make sure that our guys are talking about some of the guys that you might be looking at drafting when the draft comes around in April. Look at that.
Look at that. And I will be very keyed in Tuesday night because the first college football playoff comes out and my Oregon Ducks look like they're handling business. So more on that later. I'm a very paranoid Oregon fan, as you know, so I am very committed to not getting too far down the road. But I will say I enjoyed my Saturday, and I look forward to next Saturday as well. And I look forward to after the bye when I get to see you again and we get to hang out. And look, on a serious note, right, the bye coming at a great time, specifically for this Raiders offensive line. This is a banged up group of dudes right now, and they need a chance to hit the hard reset to number one, get healthy, to go back and self scout, see what can get better, see what will get better as the Raiders return to work 2 weeks from today in Miami, taking on the Dolphins. Well, Fitz, again, it was a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you oh so soon, and we'll do it again. So for Eddie Paskal, my friend Jason Fitz, everyone else at Silver and Black Productions, everyone enjoy a healthy, restful, safe, rejuvenative bye, and we will see you guys after that for the fifth quarter presented by Twitch.